The galaxy was buzzing with excitement. News had spread across countless planets. The tournament of the Deathworlds was about to begin. It was a challenge like no other, one that would push the limits of every species, testing their strength, survival skills, and determination. It was a competition held on the most dangerous planets in the universe, known as Deathworlds, planets where the very air could kill you, the wildlife could eat you, and the ground itself could swallow you whole. Only the strongest would survive. Humans, a relatively young and untested race in the galactic scene, had never been invited to such a prestigious event. The invitation itself was a shock to many. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community, and while humans had a reputation for being adaptable and resourceful, few believed they could survive on these hostile worlds, let alone win. Some species thought humans were weak, too soft to withstand the brutal challenges ahead. But there was one human who didn't share that doubt: Jackson Carter. Jackson was an experienced fighter, someone who had survived harsh environments on Earth itself. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in ingenuity. He had a unique way of thinking, always looking for a solution when everyone else was panicking. And when Earth received its invitation to the tournament of the Deathworlds, Jackson volunteered without hesitation. He knew that this was a chance to prove that humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors. As Jackson stood in the crowded galactic arena, the other competitors watched him closely. The alien races all seemed amused, sneering and whispering among themselves. The idea that a human, one of the newcomers, could compete on such a stage was laughable to most of them. Humans were considered a relatively weak species after all. They didn't have the advanced technology or physical prowess of the other contestants. But Jackson didn't mind. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to win. The tournament was divided into several stages, with each stage held on a different Deathworld, progressively more dangerous and deadly than the last. Class 1 Deathworlds were brutal, but still manageable. Class 13 Deathworlds were lethal beyond imagination. Only the strongest, most cunning competitors could hope to survive and emerge victorious. Jackson was ready. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked around at the others. The towering alien warriors, the cunning reptilian hunters, and the calculating insectoids. All of them seemed sure of their success, but Jackson was different. He had something they didn't: the mind of a human. The ability to think outside the box, to adapt to any situation, to survive against the odds. The countdown began. Seconds ticked by, and Jackson's focus sharpened. This was it. He was about to step onto a death world that had never seen a human before. The question was no longer whether he could survive. It was whether the other competitors could handle what a human could do. And when the doors opened, he stepped forward, a small but determined figure among the galaxy's finest warriors. As the arena gates slammed shut behind him, the universe held its breath. The tournament was about to begin, and humanity's greatest test was just starting. The moment the gates of the arena closed behind Jackson, he felt a surge of adrenaline. He was standing on a planet that could easily kill him, a Class 1 death world, one of the least dangerous, but still full of deadly threats. The landscape around him was wild and untamed. Jagged rocks jutted out from the ground like teeth, and strange, hostile creatures lurked just beyond his vision. A thick, heavy fog made it hard to see anything clearly, and the air was thick with the smell of something foul. The very environment seemed to be alive, ready to attack at any moment. Jackson didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt a sense of excitement, the thrill of a challenge. He knew what was at stake, not just for him, but for all of humanity. This was more than a tournament. It was a statement. The whole galaxy was watching, and Jackson was determined to show them that humans were not to be underestimated. Around him, the other competitors from alien races were already preparing. Some of them looked confident, checking their weapons and gadgets, ready for anything. Others seemed more nervous, unsure of what to expect. Jackson could see it in their eyes. Many of them were still doubting the human's ability to survive, and perhaps even mocking him in their minds. Jackson didn't let it distract him. He had one job: survive, and more importantly, win. The first challenge was a simple one: survive for 48 hours on the planet, avoiding the natural hazards and creatures that roamed the land. For most of the competitors, it would be a test of strength and endurance. But for Jackson, it was all about strategy. He quickly realized that his best option wasn't to fight every creature he came across. It was to outthink them. He spotted a pack of large, four-legged predators in the distance, their yellow eyes glowing in the dark. Most of the other competitors would have tried to fight them or avoid them. But Jackson had a different idea. He knew these creatures relied on their sense of smell, so he used the environment to his advantage. He covered himself in mud, masking his scent and blending into the natural surroundings. As the predators passed by, Jackson silently watched from his hiding place. He wasn't worried about being attacked. He had already figured out how to survive, and he would use his knowledge to stay one step ahead. Over the next several hours, Jackson continued to use his mind to stay safe. While the other competitors struggled with the planet's dangers, Jackson used his human creativity to find solutions. He built a simple shelter out of nearby materials, something the others didn't think to do. He used his environment to catch food, and even found a way to use the creature's patterns to his advantage. By the end of the first day, he had already outlasted several other competitors who were caught by the planet's hostile wildlife or environmental hazards. By the second day, the other competitors were starting to notice. They couldn't believe it. How had this human survived so long when so many others had failed? Some even began to keep their distance, unsure of how to deal with someone who was clearly thinking differently from everyone else. When the final whistle blew, signaling the end of the challenge, Jackson stood tall, covered in dirt and sweat, but victorious. The arena erupted in shock. He had done it. He had not only survived the first test, he had done it better than anyone expected. The other competitors were stunned. Some of them, especially those from the more powerful alien species, glared at him, their pride wounded. They had expected an easy victory, but Jackson had proven something else entirely. For the first time, they realized that humans weren't just weak. They were resourceful, clever, and capable of surviving when no one else could. And this was just the beginning. The second round of the tournament began, and this time, the challenge was set on a much more dangerous world. The Class 5 Deathworld was known for its unpredictable storms, deadly wildlife, and the constant threat of earthquakes. The landscape was full of thick forests, dark caves, and open fields, each more treacherous than the last. The environment itself seemed determined to kill anyone who wasn't prepared. As Jackson stood at the edge of the battlefield, he couldn't help but feel the pressure. The other competitors, alien warriors from far more advanced civilizations, were no longer laughing. They now looked at him with a mix of curiosity and fear. How had this human survived the last round? They couldn't believe it. But Jackson wasn't worried. He was here to prove that humans weren't just survivors. They could thrive in any situation. He had learned quickly on the Class 1 Deathworld, and now it was time to adapt to the challenges of this new environment. The rules were simple: survive and reach the designated checkpoint before the time ran out. The first to arrive would be the winner. It seemed straightforward, but the Class 5 world was anything but simple. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was unstable, shifting beneath their feet. Large predators roamed the woods, their low growls echoing through the trees. Strange, glowing plants dotted the landscape, hiding venomous insects that could kill in seconds. Jackson took a deep breath and set off, keeping his senses alert. The other competitors wasted no time either, charging forward with their advanced weapons and high-tech gadgets. Some of the aliens relied on brute strength, while others used their speed and agility to navigate the treacherous terrain. But Jackson wasn't in a rush. He had learned from his previous challenges that rushing into things without thinking could get you killed. Instead, he took his time, observing the landscape and studying the creatures that moved through it. He knew that the key to survival was not in fighting everything in sight, but in understanding the world around him. As he moved deeper into the forest, Jackson came across a large river that cut through the terrain. The current was strong, and the water was filled with dangerous, unknown creatures. He could hear them splashing beneath the surface, waiting for an unsuspecting competitor to make the wrong move. Most of the other contestants would have tried to cross the river directly, risking an encounter with the creatures lurking below. But Jackson had another idea. He noticed that the river had a series of rocks that jutted out just above the waterline. It was a risky path, but if he could carefully navigate the rocks, he could cross without being detected. Jackson moved slowly, placing his feet carefully on each rock. His heart raced, but he didn't let fear control him. He was focused on the task at hand, one step at a time. As he reached the other side, he saw a group of alien competitors struggling to cross. They were panicking, trying to fight off the creatures in the water, and they were losing valuable time. Jackson shook his head and continued his journey toward the checkpoint. The competition was fierce, but he knew his strengths. He was quick, he was smart, and he had the ability to stay calm when others were losing their heads. As he neared the checkpoint, he saw the final stretch of land. The other competitors were still fighting their way through the forest, and Jackson took advantage of their distractions. He sprinted toward the finish line, the adrenaline pushing him faster and faster. When he crossed the finish line, he looked back to see the stunned faces of the alien competitors. He had done it again. He had won. This time, they couldn't deny it. The humans weren't just lucky. Jackson's combination of brains and resilience had once again proven that humanity had what it took to survive and thrive, no matter the odds. The other competitors, once so confident, now regarded Jackson with a mix of respect and wariness. The human was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and they all knew that the next rounds would be even more dangerous. But for Jackson, this was just the beginning. He was ready for whatever the tournament would throw his way. Jackson stood on the edge of the cliff, staring at the dangerous terrain below. The Class 7 Deathworld was unlike anything he had faced before. The landscape was constantly shifting. Unstable ground, rising floods, and sudden tremors that could open cracks in the earth without warning. The air was thick with mist, making visibility nearly impossible, and the wildlife was no less terrifying. Strange creatures, with venomous spikes and enormous jaws, moved through the jungle below, always hunting, always waiting. The challenge was clear: survive for 72 hours, using the limited resources provided, and make it to the extraction point at the other side of the planet. The rest of the competitors, still reeling from the unexpected strength of humanity in the previous rounds, knew this next stage would be even harder. Jackson wasn't just a survivor. He was proving that humans could endure where others might fall. As the countdown began, Jackson took a deep breath and set off into the dense jungle. The thick foliage pressed in on all sides, and the path was nearly invisible. Every step had to be calculated. Every move had to be precise. The ground beneath his feet was soft, and sudden tremors sent ripples through the earth, making even walking a challenge. The other competitors, alien warriors, hunters, and tacticians, seemed confident. Some charged forward, weapons in hand, ready to face the dangers head-on. But Jackson knew better. He had learned from the last rounds that brute force alone wouldn't get him through this challenge. It was about adaptation, thinking quickly, and using the environment to his advantage. As he ventured deeper into the jungle, Jackson heard the distant growls of predators. He knew that staying on the ground would be a mistake. The creatures on this planet were swift, and any sign of weakness could mean death. He climbed a nearby tree, its branches thick and strong, offering a better view of the jungle floor. From up high, he could see the movements of the predators below, circling around their territory. But they couldn't reach him. Not yet. The mist in the air made it hard to see anything too far ahead, but Jackson's sharp instincts kept him alert. He noticed the signs of other competitors: broken branches, footprints in the mud, and the faint scent of fear. Some had already fallen into traps set by the planet itself. There were no signs of struggle, only quiet bodies, hidden in the underbrush. Jackson moved forward cautiously, choosing his path carefully. Every step was made with purpose. He spotted an old, abandoned shelter built by a previous competitor. Inside, there were some supplies: rations, a small knife, and a few basic survival tools. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He grabbed the items and moved on, constantly watching the jungle around him. The journey grew more difficult with each hour. Jackson's legs began to ache, and the constant shaking of the ground made it nearly impossible to stay balanced. But he refused to give up. As he reached a deep ravine, he saw an opportunity. He noticed a series of vines hanging down from the cliffs above. They were thick enough to hold his weight. Jackson swung across the ravine, landing on the other side without a single scratch. Ahead of him, he saw the extraction point in the distance, a clearing at the edge of the jungle where the shuttle would pick up the survivors. But he wasn't the only one aiming for it. A group of alien competitors was closing in, but they weren't working together. The fierce competition had caused them to turn on each other. They were all desperate to be the first to the finish line. Jackson knew this would be his toughest challenge yet, but he had something the others didn't: a human's ability to think on his feet, to adapt, and to overcome. As the other competitors fought among themselves, Jackson used the confusion to slip past them, finally reaching the clearing. When the final whistle blew, Jackson stood at the extraction point, his chest heaving but his mind sharp. Once again, he had survived. And this time, he had done it with fewer weapons and less technology than most of the other competitors. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about weapons. It was about survival. And Jackson had proven once again that humanity was far more dangerous than anyone had ever realized. The alien competitors were stunned. They had underestimated the human again, and now they were starting to see the truth. Humans weren't just survivors. They were invincible. The sun was a faint red glow in the sky as Jackson stepped onto the Class 10 Deathworld, a place far more hostile than anything he had faced before. This planet was a wasteland, filled with dangerous storms and vicious creatures. The air itself was toxic, with high levels of acid that could burn through skin in seconds. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry, filled with sharp, jagged rocks that seemed to pierce anything that dared to step on them. There was no water to drink, and food was scarce. It was a planet made for death. But Jackson didn't hesitate. He had come this far. The challenge was clear: survive for 48 hours and reach the extraction point. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jackson wasn't here to back down. He was here to prove that humans could do what others believed impossible. The other competitors were already starting to move, some of them using their advanced technology to shield themselves from the toxic air, others using heavy armor to protect their bodies. But Jackson wasn't relying on gadgets. He didn't need them. He was quick, resourceful, and most importantly, he could think on his feet. As Jackson moved deeper into the wasteland, he noticed the first threat: massive, flying creatures that soared overhead. They were enormous, with leathery wings and sharp talons, and they seemed to be on the lookout for prey. The other competitors, armed with energy weapons, immediately began firing at the creatures, trying to bring them down. But Jackson didn't waste his energy on them. He knew better. The creatures were far too dangerous to fight head-on. Instead, he focused on finding shelter. A nearby cave seemed like the perfect place to hide. But the moment Jackson entered, he realized it wasn't just any cave. It was home to a group of large, aggressive creatures, lizard-like beasts with scales tough enough to resist any weapon. Their eyes gleamed with hunger as they turned toward him, their jaws opening wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Jackson didn't panic. He had learned to stay calm under pressure. He quickly scanned the cave, looking for an escape or anything that could help him. His eyes landed on a pile of loose rocks near the entrance. He grabbed a large stone and threw it to the back of the cave, hoping to distract the creatures. The plan worked. The beasts charged after the sound, leaving Jackson a chance to slip past them and escape. He knew that running was his best option. He couldn't waste time fighting creatures when there were bigger challenges ahead. As he continued through the wasteland, the air became thicker, the acid rain starting to fall in heavy, corrosive sheets. Jackson's skin stung as the droplets landed, but he pushed on. He had no choice. He had to reach the extraction point, no matter what. Hours passed, and Jackson's body began to tire. The constant movement, the heat, and the toxic rain were wearing him down, but he kept his mind focused. He knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jackson reached the extraction point. He was exhausted, covered in scratches and burns, but he had made it. His competitors, who had relied on technology and strength, were nowhere to be seen. Some were still lost in the wasteland, struggling to survive, while others had fallen victim to the planet's many dangers. As the shuttle arrived to take him to safety, Jackson allowed himself a small, tired smile. Once again, he had survived. And once again, he had done it with nothing more than his wits and his will to survive. The others had underestimated him. And now, they were starting to realize that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The tournament was far from over, but Jackson was more confident than ever. He had proven time and time again that humans were not just survivors. They were warriors, and he was just getting started. Jackson stood at the edge of a cliff, staring into the deep abyss below. The Class 12 Deathworld was a world of extremes. Burning deserts, violent storms, and freezing temperatures. The air was thin, barely enough to breathe. The planet's surface was a broken landscape of crumbling mountains and deep, yawning canyons. And in this world, the wind howled constantly, cutting through the planet with a harsh, punishing force. Every step Jackson took felt like an effort, the thin air making his lungs burn. He had never been on a world like this before. The other competitors were already moving, some of them using suits to shield themselves from the harsh environment, while others relied on their strength to power through. But Jackson knew better than to rely solely on equipment. He had survived with just his mind and instincts so far, and he wasn't about to stop now. The challenge was simple: find the hidden artifact buried somewhere on the planet. It wasn't going to be easy. The winds made it almost impossible to see clearly, and the environment was filled with dangers lurking just out of sight. The other competitors were powerful, some of them trained for battle from birth. But Jackson had something that made him different. He wasn't afraid to think differently, to use creativity and resourcefulness when others relied on force. Jackson set off into the desert, the hot sand beneath his feet, making it feel like the ground was burning. But he didn't mind. He had prepared himself for this challenge. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of movement, any clue that might lead him to the artifact. The wind howled in his ears, and the sand whipped at his face, but he kept moving forward, step by step. As he walked, he noticed something strange, tiny, irregular footprints in the sand. They weren't from any creature he had seen before. They were alien, but unmistakably fresh. Someone had passed through here recently, and Jackson knew that they were likely headed in the same direction he was. He followed the footprints for what felt like hours, the sun beating down mercilessly. He didn't know how long the others had been searching, but he knew that he had to catch up. The artifact could be anywhere, buried beneath the surface or hidden in the cliffs. Time was running out. Eventually, he came across a canyon, its walls steep and jagged. He couldn't see the bottom, but he could hear something, a low, rumbling sound coming from deep within the earth. The other competitors must have reached the same place. This was it. The artifact had to be nearby. Jackson used his skills to scale the canyon wall, finding handholds where none seemed to exist. His hand scraped against the rough stone, but he kept climbing. As he reached the top, he saw something gleaming in the distance, a small metallic object buried in the sand. His heart skipped a beat. It was the artifact. But as he moved to grab it, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He turned just in time to see one of his competitors, a towering alien with thick, armored skin, charging toward him, a weapon in hand. The alien had clearly planned to take the artifact by force. Jackson didn't hesitate. He darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a strike from the alien's weapon. He knew that fighting wasn't the answer here. He had to be smarter. As the alien charged again, Jackson led him straight into the edge of the canyon, where the ground was unstable. The alien, too focused on the fight, didn't see the danger until it was too late. The ground gave way beneath the alien's feet, sending him tumbling into the depths of the canyon below. Jackson didn't watch. He didn't need to. He had won. With a deep breath, Jackson retrieved the artifact and made his way back to the extraction point. The winds howled in his ears, but he was unfazed. Another challenge, another victory. This time, the alien competitors didn't just look at him with curiosity. They were looking at him with respect. They were beginning to understand what humanity had known all along. The human spirit was unbreakable, and Jackson was proving it every step of the way. Jackson had faced unimaginable dangers, survived deadly creatures, and outsmarted the galaxy's greatest warriors. But the Class 13 Deathworld was different. This world was a place of chaos, a planet where survival was a constant battle against the environment itself. The atmosphere was toxic, the gravity unstable, and the planet's surface constantly shifting beneath their feet. Every breath Jackson took burned his lungs, and the ground seemed to ripple and crack with every step. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The sun, if it could even be called that, cast a dull blood-red glow across the landscape. Massive, stormy clouds rolled in from every direction, and the temperature fluctuated wildly from freezing cold to burning heat. It was a planet made to break anyone who stepped foot on it. But Jackson wasn't worried. He had come this far, and he knew what he was capable of. The final challenge was to reach the extraction point, deep within the planet's shifting core. The other competitors, tired from the earlier rounds, were already feeling the strain. The mental and physical exhaustion was clear on their faces, but Jackson remained calm. This was what he had trained for. This was his moment. As the challenge began, Jackson wasted no time. He had learned by now that hesitation would only lead to failure. The others, still relying on their technology and strength, tried to push ahead. But Jackson knew that brute force wouldn't work here. This planet didn't play by the rules. The key to surviving was adaptability. The first obstacle came quickly. A massive storm system suddenly formed overhead, and the winds picked up to dangerous speeds. The others scrambled for cover, trying to shield themselves with their gadgets and armor. But Jackson simply looked up, calculating the winds, and ran with the storm, using it to push himself forward. He let the wind guide him, ducking behind rocks and using the shifting air currents to navigate the terrain. Hours passed, and Jackson continued to move deeper into the planet's heart. The others were falling behind, some struggling with the environment, others getting caught by the planet's bizarre creatures. Jackson knew this was his chance to pull ahead. But then, as he rounded a bend in the rocky terrain, he found himself face to face with something he hadn't expected. A giant, writhing mass of alien creatures. They were unlike anything he had seen before, beasts with multiple heads, eyes that glowed in the dark, and tentacles that lashed out with terrifying speed. They were the true predators of this world. The other competitors were nowhere in sight. Jackson was alone. He could feel his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment he had trained for. The creatures advanced, circling around him. He knew that a direct fight was not an option. He couldn't win that way. But he had learned from his past experiences that there was always a way out. Always. Thinking quickly, Jackson grabbed a loose rock from the ground and threw it to the side. The creatures, drawn to the noise, turned away from him, chasing the sound. With a swift motion, Jackson sprinted between the beasts, keeping low to the ground. He used his speed and agility to weave through their massive bodies, staying just out of reach of their deadly tentacles. As he ran, he spotted the extraction point, a narrow ledge high above, where the shuttle was waiting. The creatures, distracted by the rock, were now far behind. Jackson pushed himself harder, climbing up the jagged rocks, his hands bleeding from the rough surface. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jackson reached the top. The shuttle was there, its engines roaring as it hovered in place. Jackson reached out his hand, barely able to breathe from exhaustion, but his grip was steady. He had made it. When he stepped into the shuttle, the other competitors were still struggling below, unable to make it past the creatures or the treacherous terrain. Jackson had won again. This time, there was no disbelief, no surprise in the eyes of the other aliens. They had seen him survive where they had failed. They knew now, humans were not just survivors. They were a force that could not be beaten. Jackson looked out of the shuttle's window as it lifted off, taking him away from the Deathworld and toward his victory. The galaxy had seen what humans were capable of, and there was no turning back now. Jackson leaned back in the shuttle seat, his body aching, his mind exhausted. The Class 13 Deathworld had pushed him to his limits, but somehow he had survived. He had made it through every challenge, outsmarting, outlasting, and outmaneuvering the galaxy's fiercest competitors. But now that the tournament was over, a strange silence settled over him. There was no cheer, no applause, just the steady hum of the shuttle's engines as it carried him back to the heart of the galaxy. The rest of the competitors, now gathered in the shuttle with him, were still in shock. Many of them sat quietly, their eyes staring ahead, as if trying to understand how a human had beaten them all. Some still refused to acknowledge Jackson's victory. They had come from worlds with centuries of history and advanced technologies, believing their strength alone would win. But Jackson had proven that it wasn't about strength. It was about will, survival, and the ability to think when the universe itself was trying to kill you. As the shuttle made its way back to the galactic arena, Jackson's mind wandered. He thought about Earth, about the people he had left behind. He had never imagined that a simple tournament would change the way the galaxy viewed humanity. When the shuttle finally landed, the doors opened to a scene unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. The arena, once a place of competition, now seemed almost like a stage for a new era. News stations from every corner of the galaxy had gathered, broadcasting his victory to billions. The crowd, made up of various alien species, cheered as Jackson stepped out, his tired face now illuminated by the flashing lights. He wasn't just a winner. He was a symbol, proof that humans were capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. And now, the entire galaxy was watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The tournament organizers, a group of powerful beings who had designed the challenges to test the toughest races in the galaxy, stood at the front. Their eyes, once filled with doubt, now held a deep respect for Jackson. They had seen him survive where no one thought he could. They had seen him rise to the top, even when the odds were stacked against him. Jackson's victory was not just a personal one. It was a victory for humanity. He was led to the center of the arena, where the Galactic Council waited. This was the moment Jackson had been preparing for, when the true prize of the tournament would be revealed. He stood tall, despite his exhaustion, as the council's leader. A tall, multi-limbed alien stepped forward. Jackson Carter, of Earth, the council leader's voice echoed. You have proven that humanity is a force to be reckoned with. You have surpassed all expectations, surviving the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. It is an honor to welcome you and your people into the galactic community. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jackson didn't let it overwhelm him. He nodded respectfully, understanding the weight of the moment. He wasn't just representing himself anymore. He was representing humanity, the species that had been underestimated, ignored, and overlooked by so many. The council leader continued, "From this day forward, humanity will have a permanent seat in the Galactic Council. We recognize your strength, your resilience, and most of all, your ingenuity." Jackson's heart swelled with pride, but he didn't let it show. He had earned this moment, but he knew it wasn't just about him. It was about every human who had ever been told they weren't enough. This victory was for all of them. As the ceremony ended and the crowd continued to cheer, Jackson looked out across the arena, his mind racing with possibilities. The galaxy had seen what humans could do, and now the real work began. The tournament was over, but the true challenge for humanity was just starting. The universe had opened its doors, and Jackson knew that Earth was ready to step into the light. Humanity wasn't just a new player in the galactic scene anymore. It was a dominant force, and Jackson had been the one to show them all. Jackson had spent the last few days adjusting to his new role. The galaxy had watched as humanity's representative not only survived but dominated every challenge thrown his way. He was now a hero, a symbol of human resilience, and to his surprise, much more than just a fighter. He had become a leader, an ambassador for Earth, with a seat at the Galactic Council. The council itself was a strange and diverse mix of species. Some had been around for millennia, their civilizations ancient and advanced, while others were young like humanity. But all of them had one thing in common: they had witnessed the impossible. A human had won the tournament of Deathworlds. And now, humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured. But with this new position came a new responsibility. Jackson knew he wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was now the face of Earth to the entire galaxy. And that responsibility weighed on him. Earth wasn't just a small, insignificant planet anymore. It was a rising power, and Jackson was expected to guide humanity through this new chapter. As he sat in the council chambers, surrounded by representatives of alien races, Jackson couldn't help but feel the pressure. The council's leader, a tall, multi-limbed alien with shimmering purple skin, stood in front of him. "Jackson Carter," the leader said, their voice deep and resonant. "You've proven that humanity is strong, clever, and capable. Now you must help guide your people in this new age." The weight of those words settled on Jackson's shoulders. He had never asked for this. He had only come here to survive, to prove that humans were more than capable of holding their own. But now he was being asked to lead humanity into a future where they would interact with species who had centuries of history, with technology that far outpaced anything Earth had ever seen. It wasn't just about being a warrior anymore. It was about diplomacy, decision-making, and balancing the interests of a whole planet with the desires of a vast and diverse galaxy. The challenges ahead weren't physical. They were mental, emotional, and strategic. The first task was clear. Earth had to form alliances. Many of the alien species saw humanity as a wild card, unpredictable, untested, and too new to be fully trusted. They were willing to accept Earth into the galactic fold, but only on certain terms. The Council wanted Earth's resources, technology, and most of all, its potential as a partner in future galactic endeavors. Jackson's first meeting was with a race known as the Saren, an insectoid species with a deep love for knowledge and exploration. They were interested in humanity's ability to adapt and survive, but they were also cautious, unsure if humans could maintain their place in the galaxy's delicate balance of power. Jackson listened carefully, his mind working through the possible angles. "Earth isn't just a resource," he said, looking the Saren representative in the eyes. "We're partners. We may be new to this, but we've been fighting for survival since we first discovered fire. If you're willing to take a chance on us, we'll prove that we're worth it." The Saren representative considered this for a long moment before nodding. "We are willing to listen, human. You've earned our respect." Jackson let out a quiet breath. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The first of many, he hoped. Later, Jackson met with a group of the galaxy's strongest warriors, including a few who had competed in the tournament of Deathworlds. They were impressed by his skill, but they wanted something more: respect. They needed to see that humanity wouldn't just survive in the galaxy, it would thrive, becoming a force to be reckoned with. Jackson's confidence grew with every meeting, but he still knew that this was only the beginning. His victory in the tournament had earned humanity's place in the galaxy, but now he had to make sure they stayed there. He couldn't do it alone. The fate of humanity rested not just on his shoulders, but on the choices he made for Earth's future. As he walked out of the council chambers, Jackson felt the weight of his new role. He had fought for humanity's survival, but now he was fighting for their future. The challenges ahead would be greater than anything he had ever faced, but Jackson was ready. He had already proven what humans could do on the battlefield. Now it was time to prove what they could do in the vast, uncharted galaxy that lay ahead. The galaxy was changing, and so was Jackson. As he stood at the center of the Galactic Council, looking out at the diverse group of species gathered before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a lone human in a brutal tournament, fighting for survival on deadly Deathworlds. Now he was at the heart of the galaxy's most powerful assembly, a representative of Earth and a symbol of what humanity could achieve. It had been a long road to get here. Jackson had survived the most dangerous planets, outwitted the galaxy's fiercest warriors, and earned the respect of the most powerful species. He had proved that humans were not only capable of surviving, they were capable of thriving, of becoming leaders in their own right. But now that the tournament was over, Jackson faced a new challenge: securing humanity's place in the galaxy for the long term. The other species had seen what humans could do on the battlefield, but now they had to see what humanity could do as allies, as equals. The Council had made its decision. Humanity would have a permanent seat, a voice in the decisions that shaped the galaxy. But with this new power came new responsibilities. Jackson knew that Earth's future in the galaxy depended on the choices he made now. He had spent the past few weeks meeting with leaders from every corner of the galaxy, forming alliances, negotiating trade deals, and ensuring that Earth would be seen as more than just a new player. It wasn't easy. Many of the other species were still wary of humanity. They respected Jackson's strength and intelligence, but they had their doubts about whether Earth could truly live up to its potential. Jackson didn't let the pressure get to him. He had faced worse odds before. He had fought in a tournament where failure meant death. He had survived, and he would survive this too. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the future of his planet, the future of humanity. As he addressed the Council for the first time as a permanent member, Jackson felt a wave of determination. He wasn't just representing himself anymore. He was representing every human who had ever fought for a chance, every human who had ever been told they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to make a difference. "The time has come for us to prove ourselves," Jackson said, his voice steady and confident. "We may be new to this galaxy, but we're here to stay. We may not have the history of some of the great species represented here, but we have something more valuable. We have the ability to adapt, to survive, and to grow. We're not just looking for a place in this galaxy. We're looking for a future where we stand side by side with you, where we contribute to the peace and progress of all." His words echoed through the chamber, and for the first time, Jackson saw the Council members nodding in agreement. There was no longer any doubt in their minds. Humanity wasn't just some primitive species that had gotten lucky in a tournament. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. As the meeting came to a close, Jackson walked out of the Council chambers with a renewed sense of purpose. The hard work had just begun. But for the first time, he wasn't alone in this fight. Humanity had earned its place, and now it was time to show the galaxy exactly what they could do. Jackson smiled as he looked out at the stars. The universe was vast, filled with endless possibilities, and humanity, with all its flaws and strengths, was ready to step into it. The era of Earth had just begun, and Jackson was determined to lead humanity into a future where they would no longer just survive, but thrive among the stars.